Hello everyone, I'm Laura with Works of Heart Watercolor. Today in this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to paint this ocean wave scene. So grab your brushes and let's do this. Okay, so here we have the sketch. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. Hopefully you guys can see this here. Okay, this line here is going to be for our foam that's washing up onto the beach, so this will be the sand. This is all going to be ocean water. We have a wave that's going to have some surf, crash, whatever you want to call it. I've left this section blocked out as a shadow. Here's going to be another section of a wave and another shadow. So just like this one here. So we got our crash, a shadow, another crash and a shadow, sand and surf. Okay, so we're going to start with our masking fluid. If you don't have this, feel free to skip ahead in the tutorial until after this is laid down, and we can then you can get going on your painting from there. Okay, so what I like to do when I use this is I pour a little bit into the cap. I do recommend that you cover this with like saran wrap or plastic wrap. I am going to work quickly, so it should be just fine, but it will dry out inside the container if you leave it open too long. I'm going to get my little masking fluid brush a little bit wet. So they are pretty hard bristles, but they do have some flexibility. So I'm going to go just along the bottom of this surf line here, and I'm just going to kind of dot and dash. Not really making any very specific marks, I'm just keeping it loose, keeping it random. The more random you can make these marks, usually the more natural it's going to feel. So we're just going to move along the line here. Okay. I'm going to bring it right down almost to this corner here. Now I'm going to put some on this part for our wave, our crash. And same for this one. So I'm sure you can see I have a little piece on the very tip of this brush that has hardened, so it just kind of beads up. That's what this stuff will do, and if you touch it to some of this that's already been drying on the page, it will be pretty tacky, and it will kind of grab. Just adding little bits here and there. If you want to add some to the water, just a few lines here and there, preserve some nice highlights. This is not necessary, but you're welcome to. Okay. Now real quick, I'm going to show you how you can use the toothpick. So I just dip it in just a little bit, and I just kind of scrape it along the paper. I am going in this diagonal motion because the waves are going to be coming in onto the shore kind of at the diagonal, so I don't necessarily want to go horizontal with these lines. These horizontal lines are reflecting the waves that are a lot further back in the distance, so they are going to appear horizontal because of the way the earth is. But these ones, because they're actually coming up onto the beach and they're in the foreground, I want to kind of follow this diagonal shape here. And the same thing, the more you use this, the more it will beat up on the tip of this, so your points and your lines are going to become less and less thin. So I just turn it over and I use the other point. Okay, I think I'm good with that. Okay, so I'm sure as you can see, after I have laid this down, as it's starting to dry, it turns a more yellow color, so it comes out, you know, it's not super yellow, it's more of a creamy kind of color. It's very important with masking fluid to make sure that it is completely dry before you start painting over it. So I touched that part and it's still a little tacky. Wet tacky, not sticky dry tacky. I know that's a little confusing, but if you touch it and it comes off on your finger, it's obviously still going to be a little too wet. And the thicker you lay it on, the longer it takes to dry as well. So like this little blob here is going to take a little bit longer to dry. It's not quite dry underneath. Same with this one here that I touched. But the majority of this is pretty much dry. So what we're going to do is, while this is drying the rest of the way, we're going to go ahead and move on to our sky. So I'm going to take my flat wash brush, dip it in my clean water here. And I'm just going to paint in this water at the top, going down to the horizon line here. Okay, so now that my paper is wet, I'm going to get a nice sky color going here. I'm going to take a little bit of indigo, a little bit of Prussian blue, some cobalt, and I'm just going to kind of start laying in some shapes, leaving some space in between for some clouds. And this is a wet on wet technique, meaning we put water down first and then we're putting wet paint into that background. And so as the paint spreads and dries, it will be a nice fuzzy edge, so it's going to be a nice soft clouds that we have back here. So from here, before it dries too much, I'm going to go ahead and grab maybe a yellow. Let's go ahead and we're going to do this one here. I might have a little too much blue in my brush, so it might be green. I'm just going to touch in. Yep, that's pretty green over there. Oh well. Sometimes that happens. I'm still learning to rinse out these flat brushes a lot more than my rounds. They hold a lot more water, and so they hold a lot more pigment. And so the quick swashes that I give it sometimes aren't quite enough to get all the paint out. I'm going to add just a little bit of pink to our sky. Go back in with our blue. Trying to pull out some of this green. We'll do that over here. It's got pretty green over here too. Now because I let this dry a little bit too long down at the horizon line here, you can see that when I added more paint and a little bit more water, it's starting to form this hard edge, this bloom I guess, and that's because the paint's drying at different times on the paper. So if I want to get rid of that, I would have to wait for this to completely dry, go back over this layer with another wash of clean water and lay down a second layer of color, obviously trying to avoid the whites that I've left here for the clouds. I guess we'll kind of wait and see what it does as it dries a little bit further, and if it's too harsh, then maybe we'll go back and try and tone that down a little bit, but it might make for a really nice texture and something interesting. That is one of the really awesome things about watercolor, is you get these accidental elements, and sometimes they lend really well to what you're doing. Other times they can be a little bit frustrating, but I usually like to wait and let them dry completely and see what they do, and then make my decision based off of what it looks like then. So this is still a little bit wet. Let's do the sand since we're here and it's at the bottom. We can let it continue naturally drying. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some more clean water and go right up to this masking fluid, which is definitely going to be dry by now. It doesn't take that long to dry, like I said, unless you put it in really, really heavy, thick sections. It dries pretty quickly. Okay, so for my sand color, I am going to go ahead and start with some Van Dyke brown. So I've got some different browns. I'll be pulling from Van Dyke brown, Sepia, if you want a little, add a little bit of warmth and pop of color, you can do, Daniel Smith has Quinacridone Gold. It's a really nice color. I'm also going to do a touch of a burnt sienna here. Warm it up just a little bit more. Might go ahead and add in some yellow ochre. This is one of my favorite things about watercolor, is mixing the colors. I rarely use them just straight out of the pan like this. There are some times that I do want just a very specific one tone color, and I'll do that, but mixing your colors, you really get a lot of very interesting undertones because you have so many different colors in there. And I talked too long and I spent too much time mixing that, so I need to re-wet this area again. That's okay. I also have my fan running, so that doesn't help to keep the paper wet very long. So I'm just going to kind of drop this in here. I do like to grab different colors out of my palette too and kind of just drop those in as I go. And it really is just based on what I feel. No rhyme or reason to it. Let yourself play, let yourself have fun. Don't focus too much on, oh, where exactly is she putting this color, where is she putting that color, because you want to make it your own. Letting yourself just play and enjoy seeing what you're creating is really the best part about watercolor, in my opinion, because no one is going to paint it the way you'll paint it, and there's just something really special about that. So I'm just adding a little bit of darker color right under the bottom of this foam here. It's going to create a nice shadow, make that foam look like it's dimensional. Okay, I might go back in and add just a little bit more shadow in some spots while it's still wet, so we get that nice, easy blend here, or that bleed of color, so we don't have a hard line. And actually, I think I might take a little of this color and water it down just a little bit and just kind of put some up just above that foam. Because, you know, if you go to the beach, you see that that water comes up onto the sand, and a lot of times you can see that sandy bottom color through the water once it kind of breaks up and settles for just the moment before it pulls back into the ocean. So that's going to be our little reference to that. Got a funny little piece going on here. Don't know if it's a hair. I think it might be something in the paper. That's okay. I'm just going to cover it back up. Okay. Okay, I know this looks a little crazy right now. Just stick with me. You got this, I promise. Okay, so now that we did our sand, here we go, our sky is nice and dry up here. So now what we're going to do is these areas that we kept blocked out for our shadows, we're going to go ahead and put those in first. And we're going to do this wet on dry, meaning we're not going to wet the entire surface like we did for our sky and our sand. We're going to leave everything dry and just paint in wet paint on these shadowed areas. So I'm actually going to take something similar to like the sky color, and I'm just going to add a little bit to it. I'm going to go ahead and grab some Phthalo Turquoise. This is one of my favorite colors. Oh my gosh, it just makes me so happy, you guys. Ah, it's so beautiful. To that I'm going to add a little bit more Indigo. Maybe some more of this Indanthrone blue. And if you happen to have neutral tint, which is this, it just makes everything darker and it's just what it sounds. It's a neutral color, so it's not really warm, it's not really cool. It just helps to darken a color and kind of desaturate it without changing the temperature of a color. So you can use it for either a warm color or a cool color, and it will just help to desaturate it and make it a little bit darker. So I really like using it for adding it into anything that I'm going to do a shadow with. And at this point, if you would like to switch to like your round brush, you can. I'm just really enjoying using these flat brushes. And because I don't use them very much, it's fun to experiment with. I just happened to pick it up one day and I was like, okay, maybe I'll use this for adding some water texture in this. And I ended up using it pretty much in the entire painting, and I just realized, wow, that brush lent itself to so many amazing strokes, and I can just change the angle of my brush and it gives me a completely different feeling. You know, you're able to cover lots of area in one quick movement if you need to, and as you can see, I can still get in and make little tiny marks just by barely touching my brush to the paper. So challenge yourself to use something new, or try a different brush that maybe you've never tried before. Try mixing some colors that you've never used before, or put two colors together that maybe you think there's no way that they would look good together. Because teaching yourself to be brave in doing these kinds of things that seem really scary, and you're worried about messing something up by putting the wrong color down or putting the wrong brush stroke down, you know, you have to be kind to yourself and to remember that the way to learn is to just try things for yourself, and don't think of them as mistakes. Think of them as learning opportunities, and if it worked, then you just gained a new skill that you never would probably have come across before. And if you want to look at it as a fail, don't look at it as a fail, but look at it as, now you know that that's something that's just not going to work, and now you have the knowledge to avoid making that choice again. Alright, well, I guess it's good that I talk so much because this is nice and dry. So What we're going to do now is we're going to do a wet and wet technique. So when we put water over this, some of this color is probably going to come up. That's okay, because we can always put more layers down. That's the beauty of watercolor, is the more layers you can add to your painting, the more depth you have, the more interesting the colors are going to be, because it's not going to be just one flat color, it's going to be multi-dimensional. And that's really the goal in doing this. At least for me, I like to make things that are interesting in multiple ways, not just looking at it because it's an interesting scene, but it's interesting because of different colors and different textures that happen. These could be distant clouds, you know. I really like the way that dried, so I'm probably not going to touch it. I think I'm going to leave it. It's something accidental, it's something interesting. I probably couldn't replicate it if I tried, which is, again, one of my favorite things. There's so many elements to this medium. Let's go ahead and get some water in our brush. I'm going to go right along the horizon line here. So I'm just trying to fill up all the white space with water first. Because as soon as I start touching this paint here, it is going to start to move. And there it goes. But like I said, that's okay. It's not a problem, because we're just going to add more colors and layers on top of this. Okay, looks like I need a little bit more down here. Okay, and now the real fun. Cobalt turquoise, maybe some phthalo. Right now I'm just kind of grabbing colors that I really love, and I'm just going to start dropping them in. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of that Indanthrone blue. I'm going to try and stay darker near the back. Right along that horizon line there. As you can see, I got some of this lighter green, kind of teal kind of colors. I like to just pick up colors and just start dropping them in. Again, not really any rhyme or reason. I'm just trying to keep my brush strokes loose and just kind of fluid in motion. I'm varying the spacing and the distance between them, the length of each stroke. And I like to leave little patches here and there. Now some of these are from the masking fluid, so they will naturally repel it. But try and be a little bit mindful if you can. It's not a huge deal or the end of the world if you happen to cover up every inch of your ocean with color, because we can always go back in and add those highlights back in. So it's not, like I said, not the end of the world. And to my blues, a lot of time I like to actually grab some green. So this one is actually called Undersea Green by Daniel Smith. Very appropriate for this painting, I think, huh? I just like the addition of this kind of greenish color in the water. I mean, normally you don't think of oceans as being green, but really to give this painting life and breath, I think having those different pops of color that aren't normally what you would necessarily think of, it brings a dynamic to the painting that, you know, normally wouldn't be there unless you put something in that is like that, something that's just a little bit different. Sometimes I'll even grab some yellow to make it more of a yellowy green. And not a lot of it, just hints here and there. This is still pretty wet in the back, so I'm losing a lot of my, all the colors are pretty much just becoming one color. So I might have to let that dry just a little bit before we add in some more. So here on my wave, I'm just kind of painting in kind of this gestural motion because the wave is curling over itself. You know, it's coming this way, so I'm just kind of putting a little bit of that in there. Just to emphasize that motion just a little bit. So this part that I laid the sand down, I'm just putting a light wash of color over that. Okay, so now you can really see where we laid down this masking fluid, how it's really left all of these marks. Some of them might look a little funny, but you know, that's okay. Somebody's not going to come in and be like, oh, I don't think that one belongs right there, or that doesn't look like it's quite right. Because once everything is all said and done and we add all the finishing details onto this, it's just going to make it that much more interesting. And so don't stress too much if you got some things that don't look quite right in your painting, because the only person that really knows that they look a little funny is you. And it's only because we're our own worst critic. And most people are going to look at this piece and they are going to just be blown away by your amazing talent, and the way you put these marks down on the page is just going to be, you know, phenomenal to them. So, you know, again, I keep saying it, but be kind to yourself, because I'm sure what you're doing is absolutely amazing. So just keep rooting yourself on and just keep going with it. Okay, so now I've let this dry for quite a bit longer, and it looks like we're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more detail into the water. I'm going to do this wet on dry, so because this is all dry, I'm not going to go over and add another layer of water. I'm just going to use wet paint right onto this dry surface to get some of my textures. So I am going to use this paint fairly dry. My brush is damp, but I'm not going to make it really wet because I don't want to lift too much color off of the page, because the more damp your brush is, any color underneath on your paper can be lifted up. And actually I'll go ahead and I'll show you an example of that so you kind of understand what I mean by it if you don't know those terms. So to lift color, if you take a damp brush and you just rub it on a piece or an area of the painting that has color on it, see it lightens up, and I can lift it by just pushing my brush into the paper and wiping off, and it will lift that color right out. So now I have a nice light area. So if you ever do something a little bit too dark, don't freak out. Take a little bit of water, put it over it, and just lift it with a brush or a clean paper towel. And if we want to just add that color back in, we can just add it right back in. And I might actually lighten up some of this area here, so I'm just going to go over in big sections, big strokes, and lift it all out fairly evenly. Okay, I like that a little bit better. I might add a little bit more green color underneath there a little bit later, but go back in, pick up some more color. Here I'm just kind of drawing in some horizontal lines, just for the illusion of waves way off in the distance, the water that's coming in. And again, as we get to this forefront, which is in front of this wave here that's coming onto the beach, the water is going to crash over and naturally come in this diagonal trajectory. So I think I'm going to actually switch to my round 2. There it is. And for this I am going to try a more dry brush technique. So I put the paint on my brush is fairly dry, meaning my brush is not really damp, so I don't have lots of water and lots of paint. I have just a little bit of water and a little bit of paint. And I'm just going to kind of drag it. And see, it's so dry that it's not really coming off, so we're going to add a little bit more water. There we go. So you get these really cool textures because what's happening is your paper has what they call like a tooth or a texture to it, and with that tooth it will grab any of the paint that just happens to be sitting on the bristles. If it's just damp enough, it will come off in these kind of little just little pieces here and there, so you get just a touch of color. I like using this technique on the water like this here. I really like to use it for if I do trees, use it for the bark on trees. It looks really nice, especially like birch trees. It's a great simple little trick that you don't have to spend too much time doing to get this really nice effect. It does take a little practice and, you know, feeling how much water to paint you need, but as you can see, I still definitely don't have it perfected, but the more you do something, the better you get at it. So I just keep trying. Keep practicing. Keep playing. Maybe I'll pull in some of this cobalt blue for a little touch of different color flavor here. Maybe a little too dark down there, so I'm just kind of wetting that paint and kind of spreading it back out, lightening it up just a little bit. Alright, I think that looks pretty good. Trying to see if there's any other areas I might want to add to. feel like I lost my shadow just a little bit on this one, so I'm just adding a little bit more to it. Oh, and I see this one, I'd love it to be darker, but those textures are so pretty. I don't think I want to mess with that. I think I'm just going to leave that just like it is. I've got enough of a shadow under here. I think once this masking fluid comes off and we add our detail and our bleed-proof white or our gouache, it will be it'll be just fine. And actually, I think this might be masking fluid. It is. See, I just kind of peeled that right off, and I got this nice white spot in the sand right there. Oh well. Sometimes that happens. I could probably go in and try and put a little bit of color there. Not sure if we can match that up quite right. It's really not that big of a deal. Oh, you can actually use dry brush technique on the sand as well. A little bit of sepia maybe. I'm not going to do too much, just maybe just a little bit there. Sorry if I put my head in the way right there. I missed this little spot of beach. Or ocean, one of the two. We'll just put kind of both colors down there, so who knows what exactly it is down there, huh? Alright, so now we need to let this completely, absolutely dry. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to let this dry 100%. Because you don't want to go through putting all of this wonderful work into this piece to go and to peel this masking fluid off when it's still not quite dry enough and rip your entire painting. Believe me guys, this is really, really, really important. I know that it can be really difficult to be patient and let it dry completely, but, you know, again, just maybe get up, get a snack, get on your phone, look through some great Instagram pages, but please, 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 just let it dry completely. If you think that it's dry completely, let it dry for another 10, 15, 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you my heat tool here, and it's just going to help speed up this drying process. Okay. So even with the heat, it's still a little bit damp because this is 100% cotton paper. It does tend to hold on to the water a little bit longer, which is actually really nice when you're trying to work with something like wet into something like this, just because you're not going to have to constantly keep re-wetting the paper if you were using something that was not 100% cotton. This brand is actually Legion. I can probably show it to you here. This is Stonehenge by Legion, and this is a wonderful paper. I just absolutely fell in love with it. It's also a reasonably priced cotton paper, unlike Arches, which is also 100% cotton, but it's a pretty expensive paper, and if you're like me, you don't like to spend tons of money on paper because then you're afraid to use it, and what good is watercolor paper to just sit there and not be used? It's not really any good at all. So I don't like to be intimidated because my paper is so expensive that I'm afraid to mess up, or, you know, that, oh, no, I have to save it only for the best things. And then if you save it for the best things, now, you know, you get so overwhelmed by wanting to make the perfect piece that you just don't use it. So I make myself use it. I take it out and I paint. I use it as practice paper sometimes. I'll just paint little things that I want to work on. Maybe not necessarily like a major piece like this to where I'm like, okay, it's got so many elements, I don't want to mess one thing up and then I ruin the whole painting. So I keep it simple and I try not to put too much pressure on what I'm painting on that paper. Alright, it's still slightly damp, so I'm going to give it a few minutes to dry. Okay guys, so this is completely, totally dry. I hope yours is 100%, 110% dry. So what I like to do is you can either use your finger to take it off. If you have a rubber or kneaded eraser, like this one here, as you can see, it's got all these different colors because once I rub it across this, it tends to pull up just a little bit of the paint, so I don't necessarily always use this. I use it if I have a lot of pieces that I just can't get off with my fingers, but I like to gently just rub. So I just kind of push it off, and you'll see it just kind of rolls up. So I just kind of rub into the paper a little bit, brush it off to the side. There we go. Look at that. Oh, this is so satisfying, you guys. Look at how beautiful that white is. So nice. So usually these smaller pieces in the water are usually the hard ones to get off. So like this one right here, I just tend to go back and forth on it this way, and then I'll go back and forth this way. And it usually, if you just kind of like rub, kind of maybe in like even a circular motion, that way you're covering all grains or all tooth directions of the paper, because it will get stuck in all kinds of little tiny crevices in that tooth texture. And I'm pushing down fairly hard, but I'm not, you know, I'm not using a fingernail or anything like that. I'm just using the very soft pad of my finger, just so that way I'm not damaging the paper. And I go fairly slow with this, you know, I don't want to just like grab it and rip it all off at one go. I just slowly work it off. And so you'll have this nice, funny little ball of squishy masking fluid when you're done. Okay, there's still a few spots, these little tiny ones, usually with the toothpick. That's, I think, because maybe when you're scratching into the paper, you're probably creating a little bit more of a groove for it to sit down inside, so it tends to stick to the paper a little bit better, or a little bit more, I should say. I'm just taking my eraser and just gently going across any areas that might still have some. Okay, now we are ready for the fun stuff. So we have our bleed proof white, and I also have Windsor Newton gouache. I've never actually used this gouache on a painting like this. I almost always use the bleed proof white just because it's easy, it's handy, I don't have to get any extra trays out to use it. I could put this gouache in my regular palette and then scrape it out when I'm done. I haven't actually tried this one. Some gouaches are actually, they will reconstitute just like watercolor, so you can let it dry in your palette, add water to it, and it will be just like new again. I don't know if this one does. I feel like because it's Windsor Newton, it probably will. But I don't know for sure. So I guess we could always try it. Let's put a little dot of gouache right in here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ground my funny little frayed out cheap little brush here. I don't even know if it has a name on it. And I'm going to get it wet. Dry it off a little on my paper towel, and I'm going to pick up some gouache. I'm going to just dunk my brush into it, and then I'm going to tap off to the side, so that way I don't have a ton of paint just like globbed onto the end, but it is distributed throughout the bristles. And I'm going to come right down here into this surf line, and I'm just going to kind of tap. I'm kind of going over this white that's already there, adding some new little specks, picking up more gouache as I go along. So if there are some areas that you'd like to reshape, you can definitely do that with the gouache here. So as you can see, it will pretty much just cover up whatever's underneath it. And if you feel like your painting doesn't need this portion and you like the way your masking fluid happened to just leave the perfect edge for you, then definitely you don't have to do this. This is just, I like to add just a little bit sometimes, just to fill in a few areas that might be looking like they're lacking a little bit. Kind of build up some areas that I think need to be a little bit more. Okay. So that is gouache. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rinse my brush from that. I'm going to show you the bleed proof white. So you can see they're pretty similar products. This one just is a lot thicker, pastier product. So I get my brush wet and I just kind of like roll my brush around in it. Kind of dab it in there. So I got nice bits on there. And I really like the shape of this, so I'm not going to mess with that one too much. I am going to add just a little bit here and there. This one I feel like we could play up a little bit more. And as you are working and more of the gouache is coming off the brush, when you tap with a brush like this, you'll get these fun, tiny little marks that are very reminiscent of ocean spray. So as I work, I tend to remember to try and not get rid of all of, or not to keep loading up on paint, to use some of this tiny bit of remnant that's left for this spray here. And also, if I don't keep re-wetting my brush, the moisture that's already in here that I put in there will also help get this little bit drier kind of texture. Because the wetter this is, the thicker it's going to stick to itself. So you'll have a heavier paint. And get some sprays up over here. Okay, I think I like that. Rinse my brush. And now I am going to go in with my round 2 here. You're welcome to use the smaller brush. I think for now I'm just going to stick with my 2. I'll roll my brush around in there. And I like to turn my brush so that way I get a nice point on the end of that again. Oops. And I'm just going to add Kind of like that dry brush technique again. Just here and there. Just little sparkles of light on the water. And here I like to take my brush in this diagonal direction and just kind of put some lines in. Maybe coming down from where this is going to curve in. To the wave here. I think maybe we'll go ahead and grab our 000 here. Any teeny brush will do. I'm just going in, putting random marks here and there. Okay. I might. Some of these lines I feel like on the beach coming up here are maybe just a little too harsh. So I'm actually going to go ahead and grab my round 6. Pick up some of this lighter kind of color here. Just going to gently add a little bit of color over some of it. Just kind of tone it down just a hint. Sometimes things are just a little too white. I want my surf to be white. I want some of these areas to be lighter, but not so bright, because I don't want them to compete too much with what's going on with the surf here. Actually, I am going to kind of maybe put in some color here and there on the surf. We can do that, and then what we can do, actually I might add some more of this green kind of color. Sure, you're probably thinking, what did she just do? She just ruined it. Nah. Because we have bleed proof white. So what we can do is I'm going to go in here, dot some on my brush, and I'm going to gently just tap over some of that I just laid down. Maybe I'll work some of that up into the wave a little bit. Okay. I think that looks pretty good. I'm gonna add a little bit of color right there. Maybe a little too much white showing right there. Tone it down just a hair. Okay. So that is looking really good. I wish I could see through the camera what you guys are doing, because I'm sure it is fantastic. I know that you guys are putting your own spin on this. You know, especially when it comes to mixing your own colors. You know, ours are never going to be exactly the same because we're two different people. We mix differently, we see things differently. Some people are drawn to different colors more than others. Like for me, I'm really drawn to obviously these more green, teal kind of colors. I just really, really love them. If you couldn't tell by the color of the tape on my paper, I love these blue greens. So I guess all that's left is to kind of just look over your painting, see if there's any spots that maybe you want to add to, or maybe possibly fix if you feel like you need to fix anything. Again, I try not to be too hard on myself, or not to say, oh, I really didn't like, you know, the way this certain area came out, or oh man, I really love this, I wish everything was as good as that. Because, you know, not every painting is going to be 100% perfect, at least in my opinion, it's not. All that's left to do is, if you want to add any additional details, I think this one, I didn't do it in the, in this one here, but I think since this is a new painting and it's a new day, I think I'm going to add some little birds, because why not, right? So I'm going to go ahead and grab a dark color here. This is some of the neutral tint. I'm going to grab another really awesome color from Daniel Smith. It's called Moonglow. It's like this really dusty kind of desaturated purple. It's really, really beautiful. So if you have a chance to pick up some new colors, I highly recommend that one. It's a really nice color. Okay, got some of that on my brush. We'll start off with the traditional V-bird here. There he is. And one kind of from the side. And these, just like some of the marks that you make in the water, they don't have to be any really specific marks, because you do several of them in the sky, and you have this one here that everyone knows is the traditional bird silhouette shape, and you can just put a few different random shapes in, and they're gonna translate as birds. So don't stress too much about making them perfect. Alright, I think I like that. Just a few little birds way out in the distance, enjoying one of the best views that nature has to offer. Alright guys, are you ready for the best part of this painting? At least for me, it's one of the best, besides doing the whole painting. I love the reveal. And this is also one of the scariest moments too, because you're just like, man, am I going to peel up this tape and I'm going to have all of these bleeds on the side, or am I going to have this beautiful crisp edge? Well, it's the moment of truth. I used the Washi tape. I found that especially on this 100% cotton paper, any other kind of tape really tends to stick too much to this paper and it tears up some of the paper. It doesn't tear it a lot, but it definitely removes some of the fibers. So I have gone from using the traditional blue painter's tape to this washi tape because I have a lot less paper pieces come up with it. So and once we get down to this tape that's going to be right here, it's very important to make sure that you pull away from your painting. Sorry, this got wrapped around the side here. Because you don't want to pull in towards your painting. See, I don't know if you guys can see that right there, but there is that little bit of paper that came up. You probably can't see the tear in the camera, but it removes some of it. If I just kind of lightly rub the paper, you can kind of get that tear piece to look pretty normal again. So you can't really tell that it's there. Okay, first layer is off, and now the moment of truth. So like I said, I just go slow and I pull away from my painting. I don't want to pull in towards this direction, because if anything is stuck here and I pull into my painting, I'm going to rip right into my painting. So this way, if I pull away and there's anything stuck, at least I'm pulling it away and I'm not going to ruin anything that is painted. I might ruin some of this white paper, but that's okay, because that can be covered up by a frame. So far, so good. Look at that clean edge, you guys. It's so beautiful. So satisfying. Oops. I'm getting so excited. Last piece. Maybe, if I can get this tape off. There we go. And there it is. Look at that, you guys. Isn't it amazing how you reveal this beautiful white border and it just makes your entire painting just come to life? I mean, it makes everything pop. It makes all your whites pop. It makes all your colors show up. It's just, this is one of my favorite parts. So excited. Okay, so now the last thing is to sign your painting. A lot of people ask, what do I sign my paintings with? I sign mine with paint, just because, I don't know, I've always done it, and I've always liked the idea of the only thing being on the paper is the paint. But, you know, if you want to sign in a micron pen, or, you know, something like that, or even, you know, some people don't want to sign the actual painting, they want to sign it on the back. Do whatever is good for you, because, you know, it's whatever you want it to be. I have a favorite artist, her name is Sarah Cray. And she always says that, you know, it's your painting, it's your life. Do whatever you want. And it's totally true, because the only person that can tell you what to do with this painting is you. So do whatever makes your heart happy. If you want to sign it with a pen, sign with a pen. If you want to learn to sign in paint, then just practice your signature over and over in paint. I just do my initials. It's simple, it's easy, and it's just what I like to do. So let's see. I think I'm going to go right here. And there we go. it's totally finished, you guys. Gonna bring it up a little closer. You can take a look at it here. All those beautiful textures. And look at, doesn't this just look like this amazing set of clouds just way back in the distance? Maybe it's some fog that's going to be rolling in for the night. Got all these different colors in the water here. Got this nice shadow under the sand, and then you can always go back and add some more shadow. I can actually show that to you now, so if you decide that you want more shadow, you can see what it looks like. We're all about the learning here. And the teaching. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab some Van Dyke Brown, some Sepia, and now is actually a really great time to use some of my neutral tint. So if I want to darken this up without making it black, because black tends to make the colors look very grayed out rather than just like desaturated. I don't really know exactly how to explain it, but when a color desaturates, it still has all of those undertones of the color in it. When something is grayed, those colors just become, I guess, more murky, if that makes any sense, or for lack of a better word, they become more grayed, you know? Alright, so for this, what you can do is I just take my little tiny brush and I just kind of run it along very carefully some of this surf line. And you don't have to go over all of it. In fact, it's generally better if you don't, because you don't want it to just be a perfect outline. Just highlighting some of the certain, or I guess shadowing some of these certain areas, you know, the viewer will understand what's happening because of the value. And so you don't need it to go across the entire line. I just picked some spots that seem like they should have some nice shadow, like these ones that are pushed in. Like here you have some surf coming here and this way, so obviously this piece in the middle is pushed back, so it's going to be shadowed because it's further back in the distance. And one of the ways to have really successful paintings is to be present in knowing about these values and understanding how the values work to display what you want them to display, or to convince what you're trying to show. So dark values generally mean that something is recessed or pushed back or underneath. So because this wave, surf, crash, whatever you want to call it, the foam is sitting on top of the sand, it's casting a shadow on the sand underneath it because the light is on top of the foam and is not getting all the way through to the sand that's down here. So putting in those shadows help to raise that foam more in the foreground so the viewer understands that it's on top of something. Just like these shadows under the waves here, because they're curling over, the light is hitting the top of the wave and the light's not getting through all the water, so underneath is going to be shadowed. Alright, I think I'm happy with that. Let me bring this back up to the camera so you can see it closer. There we go. So just that little addition of a shadow helps to pop out that foam there and make it look a little bit more dimensional. There we go. thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment below. I would love to answer any of your questions that you might have or give you any tips or pointers on things that you might be struggling with. I hope you have a great time and happy painting. Thanks. Bye.